Number 9. The Somali Coast. Starting in the 1980s, the Calabria, the Italy-based Ndrangheta criminal organization, has been involved in the dumping of radioactive waste. In 2005, former member Francesco Fonti accused the crime syndicate of sinking 30 ships filled with toxic waste off the Somali coast for companies that didn't want to pay what it would cost to get rid of the hazardous materials properly. That same year, drums of radioactive waste washed ashore in the northern part of the country following a tsunami. The catastrophic wave damaged the containers, causing them to leak hazardous materials into the environment. People got sick with a variety of alarming symptoms, including strange skin disorders, difficulty breathing, abdominal bleeding, and mouth bleeds, according to the UN Environment Program spokesperson Nick Nuttall. UN officials who were familiar with the situation told the press that the symptoms were consistent with radiation sickness. In addition to the damage done by the Ndrangheta crime family, many other European companies dumped toxic waste off the northern Somali coast on their own accord during the 80s. The practice increased dramatically after the Somali leader Mohammed Siad Barre was violently ousted in 1991. After the Fukushima disaster in 2011, concerns resurfaced regarding the dumping of waste off Somalia, and more of it was found, indicating that the practice was still going on. Unfortunately, the organizations and companies that dump their radioactive waste off Somalia are taking advantage of the country's largely unregulated waters and its lack of a functioning government. Number 8. Fukushima. In 2011, a powerful earthquake struck near the Japanese coast. A mega tsunami followed. The disaster caused severe damage to the Fukushima Daiichi power plant in Okuma, leading to a nuclear meltdown. Radiation levels skyrocketed to 10 million times higher than what's considered normal. Nearly 100,000 people living within an 18-mile radius of the plant were evacuated from their homes on a moment's notice. Only a handful of former residents have been allowed to return to villages on the very outer reaches of the exclusion zone. Over a decade later, cleanup at the power plant is still in its early stages, and radioactivity is still detectable in the water. Meanwhile, nature has reclaimed much of the surrounding area, taking over the yards, parking lots, and homes that people had no choice but to leave behind. In 2016, photographer Tetsuro Takahana visited Fukushima's so-called difficult-to-return-to zones when he captured eerie images of overgrown cars and buildings. In one photo of an athletic field, only the goalposts remain visible as the plant life conceals the remaining evidence of a former human presence. Speaking with Japanese news outlet Asahi Shimbun, Takahana said that it was as if time had stopped, and yet the grass and trees continue to grow. Number 7. Runit Island. Runit Island is part of Enewetak Atoll in the Marshall Islands, located halfway between Australia and Hawaii in the South Pacific. Between 1948 and 1958, the US performed dozens of nuclear tests at Enewetak Atoll. During a cleanup effort in the 1970s, workers built a concrete dome on Runit Island to house the radioactive waste left behind from the tests. Nicknamed the Tomb, the structure was intended as a temporary fix until the American government devised a long-term decontamination plan. But that plan was never put into action. Today, the concrete is crumbling as radioactive waste seeps into the soil below the building. A major weather event like a typhoon or storm surge is all it would take to rip the dome out of the ground and disperse its contents into the ocean. The damage is still being done anyway, as contamination continues to leak, causing locals to fear for their health. During the 1980s, the US returned Enewetak Atoll to the Marshallese government. The American government claims that it's fulfilled its obligations to the country, but Marshallese authorities argue that they lack the resources to clean up the mess that the US left behind. Runit Island was quarantined decades ago and remains off limits today. But this doesn't necessarily protect residents from the harmful effects of the waste. Number 6. Lake Kache. Lake Kache was located in the southern Ural Mountains of eastern Russia. Starting in 1951, the Soviet Union used it as a dumping ground for nuclear waste for a nearby nuclear facility, owned by the Mayak Production Association. The Russian government kept Mayak and the activities at Lake Kache a secret until 1990. Western scientists first gained access to the site 2 years later. They discovered an 11-foot thick layer of radioactive sediment at the bottom of the lake. Even more alarming, the highly toxic water had made its way into nearby freshwater sources. Unbeknownst to the local residents, around 65% of the population had become poisoned years earlier. In another shocking incident disregarding public health entirely, the lake had dried up in 1967. Radioactive dust blew into nearby villages, causing residents to fall ill. Because the clandestine facility and the secret city its operators lived in did not exist on any maps, nobody knew exactly what or whom to blame when locals suddenly became sick. To prevent the problem from worsening, the government filled the lake in with cement. It didn't fix the problem entirely. Certain nearby sites will remain polluted for centuries to come. But the measure seems to have reduced the dangers associated with Lake Kache itself, which at one point was capable of releasing enough radiation to kill a person within 1 hour standing alongside its shoreline. Experts admittedly don't know how dangerous Lake Kache is, because even the most skilled radiologists lack experience with managing such a heavily contaminated site. But they're monitoring it the best they can, and will continue to do so for years to come. Number 5. Goana Institute of Radiotherapy. The Instituto Goana de Radioterapia, Goana Institute of Radiotherapy, was a private radiotherapy institute in Goiânia, Brazil. In 1985, the business relocated to another site, leaving behind a capsule containing 3.3 ounces of radioactive cesium chloride. The institute failed to notify the authorities as required by law. When the abandoned site was partially demolished, the hazardous material was left unsecured. One night in 1987, 2 men trespassed onto the premises and took some of the radiotherapy equipment, thinking that it had some value as scrap metal. They placed the items into a wheelbarrow and took them to one of the thieves' homes, where they began to take the equipment apart. Unbeknownst to the pair, they had taken the canister filled with radioactive cesium chloride. Later that night, both men began to throw up from radiation sickness. They nevertheless continued to dismantle the equipment. The next day, one of the men became dizzy and began having diarrhea. He visited a doctor, where his illness was blamed on something he must have eaten, and he was told to go home and rest. Meanwhile, he continued to tamper with the radioactive items and eventually sold them to the owner of a scrapyard. The business owner noticed a blue glow coming from within the canister of cesium chloride. Believing it had supernatural powers, he took it inside his home and showed it to his family and friends, including his 6-year-old daughter, who smeared the glowing powder on her body. He then sold some of the radioactive materials to another scrapyard. In the meantime, the alien robber's hand swelled up, ultimately requiring some of his fingers to be amputated. The mysterious infection spread to his arm, which also had to be cut off. 2 people died from exposure to the cesium chloride, drawing the attention of national authorities, who soon began investigating and scrambled to contain the problem. By then, some 250 people had been exposed. 20 of them showed signs of radiation sickness and required medical treatment. To this day, survivors of the incident receive monetary compensation from the Brazilian government, but it doesn't solve all their problems. In addition to having elevated health risks due to their exposure, they are forced to face radiation-related prejudices in their everyday lives. Number 4. The Polygon. The Soviet Union was responsible for a lot of radioactive pollution that persists in many of its former territories today. One of those sites is a 7,150 square mile area of land in Kazakhstan, known as the Polygon. From 1949 to 1963, the Soviets performed dozens of above-ground nuclear tests there. They performed underground tests until 1989. Consequently, health authorities estimate that as many as 1.5 million people were exposed to radioactive fallout. In addition to being subjected to acute bursts of radiation, residents were exposed to low doses of it over time. Researchers have kept tabs on people living in and near the Polygon, as well as their kids and grandkids, to learn more about the health effects caused by the radiation. Their findings reveal elevated cancer risks and indicate that the effects of radiation on cardiovascular health may be passed down hereditarily. The fallout appears to be spread mostly by high winds, which distribute the hazardous material in different directions from the Polygon. Residents have been dealing with its effects for decades now. In addition to cancer and cardiovascular issues, they blame the fallout for a host of health problems. Researchers haven't been able to link those additional problems to the radioactive fallout, but are continuing to investigate the matter in hopes of better understanding the disturbing legacy the tests have left behind. Any future findings could influence ongoing debates whether or not it's a good idea to reduce carbon emissions by expanding nuclear technology. Number 3. Ramsar. Most of the places on today's list are radioactive, all thanks to pollution from human activity. But the Iranian city of Ramsar, located along the Caspian Sea, is different. It contains the highest measured natural background levels of radiation in the world. In certain areas, the doses far exceed the maximum recommended levels for radiation workers. Ramsar's excessive radiation levels are caused by the local geology. The groundwater boasts a higher than average concentration of uranium, making it naturally radioactive. The water makes its way into local hot springs, which locals and tourists alike eagerly bathe in without second thought. Scientists have pondered whether it's a good idea to relocate Ramsar's residents to a place with less radiation. One group of researchers from the University of Rochester and the Rafsanjan School of Medical Sciences in Iran think so. In a study, they pointed out that natural radiation has existed since life began. So in one sense, it's nothing new for humans, animals, and plants to be exposed to it. But the team found a correlation between the abnormally high levels in Ramsar and the rate of cancer among locals, leading to some troubling concerns about whether it's a safe place for people to live. For now though, the city remains inhabited and life continues as usual. The future of Ramsar and whether its people will eventually have to move remains to be seen. Number 2. The Hanford Site. Located along the Columbia River in Washington State's Benton County, the Hanford Site is a decommissioned nuclear production complex owned and operated by the federal U.S. government. It was established in 1943 as part of the infamous Manhattan Project and was home to the world's first-scale plutonium production reactor. Plutonium produced at the site was used in the world's first nuclear bomb, as well as Fat Man, the atomic bomb that was dropped over Nagasaki. The material was also tested at the Trinity site, where the first nuclear weapon was detonated. The Hanford site was expanded during the Cold War. It grew to include 9 nuclear reactors and 5 plutonium processing complexes, where the plutonium for most of the US nuclear arsenal's more than 60,000 weapons was produced. While many major nuclear technological advancements were made at the Hanford site, the outcome wasn't all good. Most of the nuclear reactors were shut down between 1964 and 1971, and the final reactor was finally decommissioned in 1987. The property was highly contaminated with over 53 million gallons of high-level radioactive waste left behind. Government authorities devised a cleanup plan in 1989, but unfortunately, a lot of troubling damage was already done by then. Official documents have revealed that the activities at the Hanford site released significant amounts of radioactivity into the surrounding area, including onto the land and into the Columbia River. Additionally, it was found more recently that one of the site's underground tanks was leaking hundreds of gallons of radioactive waste into the ground every year since 2010. The pollution remains a problem today, threatening local fish and wildlife and their habitat. For now, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Damage Assessment, Remediation, and Restoration Program is evaluating the potential effects of the radiation on the groundwater, surface water, sediment, soil, plants, animals, and the environment. The organization is also looking into the possible impacts on public health. This information will help experts determine what the proper next steps are for mitigating future damage, although it's sadly too late to prevent a lot of harm that's already been done. Number 1. Ozersk. Tucked into the forest of Russia's Ural Mountains is a small city surrounded by barbed wire fences, gates, and guards. It's called Ozersk, but for a long time it didn't exist on maps, and its 100,000 residents were wiped clean from the census. Gulag prisoners built Ozersk in the late 1940s as housing for employees of the nearby Mayak nuclear plant. The people who lived there simply vanished from mainstream society. They were contracted to live there for 8 years, and their contact with the outside world was extremely limited the entire time. Life was good in many ways for the residents of Ozersk. They enjoyed much nicer housing, food, education, and healthcare than the people who lived outside the city received. Even today, the material quality of life remains well above average there. But there's a dark side to this reality. Ozersk is one of the world's most contaminated cities, and the government conveniently kept this information hidden from residents for decades while they suffered from health issues and even died from radiation exposure. Mayak dumped nuclear waste into nearby bodies of water, leading to extensive pollution in the area. Residents are free to leave the city, but must choose to stay despite the risks. Outsiders are allowed to visit, with special permission from the Russian secret police, but are kept under strict tabs during their stay.
Number 10. Forgotten Soviet Base. Lana Sator is a talented Russian photographer who has visited numerous military equipment graveyards across the country. She's taken thousands of images of abandoned fighter planes, helicopters, and other vehicles that were left behind when the Cold War ended. Captured from a bird's-eye view using a drone, the haunting pictures convey the shocking amount of obsolete machinery that sits abandoned in open fields and hangars, crumbling from the effects of time and weather. One deserted Soviet base in Russia's Far East contains at least 1,000 tanks. A lot of the equipment at these sites was decommissioned when the Soviet Union fell in 1991. Most of the machines are too old and damaged to have any practical value today, and they're not really worth restoring either. But they're fascinating in their own right as relics of a bygone era defined by frenzied competition between the United States and Russia for military superiority. Number 9. Mysterious Mansion. Award-winning photographer Brian Sansevero has made a career out of documenting abandoned properties. One of the most fascinating places he's explored is a 57-room mansion located just a few miles outside New York City. Built during the 1930s, it contains an indoor tennis court, a bowling alley, a ballroom, 2 bars, and a private library. The sprawling home was abandoned during the 1970s and has remained empty ever since. It appears as though the owners left suddenly and in a hurry, leaving most of their furniture and a large amount of personal belongings, including shoes, toys, books, several pianos, rugs, televisions, stuffed animals, a carriage, and more. In fact, it seems like they deserted the home in the middle of renovating part of it. They even left family photos and other seemingly sentimental items behind. Aside from some graffiti and the damage that happens when a building is neglected, the interior remains just as the family left it. It's clear based on the items inside the house that several children grew up there and that the family enjoyed music and golf. At least one of the kids attended boarding school, and it looks as though the children may have been homeschooled at one time. The furniture seems to date back to various time periods, indicating that the house had one owner for a solid 40 years or so. But who were they, and why did they suddenly leave and never return? According to Sansevero's research, the homeowner was a millionaire who had a habit of buying mansions and leaving them to rot. The man's reasons for being a serial home deserter are a mystery. Number 8. Evergreen Crystal Palace. Robert Plaster was an incredibly wealthy entrepreneur from Missouri who founded the energy supplier Empire Gas and numerous other enterprises. During the 90s, he had a 30,000 square foot mansion built on a large hill overlooking Table Rock Lake in Branson. Known as the Evergreen Crystal Palace, the 14-bedroom home contains a 20-car garage, a helicopter pad, multiple kitchens, housing quarters for live-in staff, a shooting range, and other luxurious amenities that most of us can only dream of having. Each bedroom is themed and decorated with expensive artwork from around the world. At one point in time, Evergreen Crystal Palace was the most expensive home ever built in Missouri. It remained in the family after Plaster passed away in 2008, but nobody currently lives there. In fact, the house looks like it hasn't been used since it was built, and it definitely hasn't been updated much since then. The decor, furniture, and appliances are visibly dated but in spectacular condition. Everything looks brand new, making a walk through the mansion feel like a literal step back in time. The Plaster family decided to sell the home last year after the estate's trustee had a health scare. Real estate agent Ken Coleman came out of retirement to sell the mansion, which is on the market for $80 million. He invited YouTuber and urban explorer Big Banks to the property in hopes of attracting potential buyers. The marketing strategy appears to be helping. The day after the influencer's video launched, Coleman received 68 phone calls from interested parties. Robert Plaster worked hard all his life and always made it a point to give back to the community. In honor of his giving spirit, proceeds from the sale will fund college scholarships. Number 7. Creepy Hospital. Thanks to social media, people have the opportunity to see abandoned places that they'll never get the chance to explore firsthand, and that they most likely wouldn't even know about otherwise. A 25-year-old urban explorer and TikToker named Sunny recently posted footage of a creepy deserted hospital that he found somewhere in the US and spent 6 hours investigating. The facility is filled with medical equipment, beds, fully stocked rooms, and even televisions that still work. In one laboratory, there's a fridge filled with old blood samples. There's paperwork and computers in the offices, and the operating tables are still set up as though they're awaiting the next patient. Some parts of the hospital appear frozen in time, as if they've been left untouched since the property was abandoned. Others are in disarray and are damaged from neglect and vandalism. Someone had painted the word "help" in bright red letters on several of the walls. As an experienced explorer, Sunny has seen many abandoned properties. But even he was confused by the state the hospital was left in. It seems as though it closed in a hurry, perhaps leaving the owners with no time to get rid of things that normally aren't left behind when a place shuts down. Or maybe they simply didn't care to empty the building out. The circumstances of the closure are just as much of a mystery as the hospital's location, which Sunny is keeping a secret to prevent vandals from causing any more damage. Would you check out this creepy hospital if given the chance? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Number 6. Abundant Life Building. Driving through downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma, it's almost impossible to miss the crumbling, windowless eyesore known as the Abundant Life Building. The 7-story structure was built in 1958 as the headquarters for a controversial televangelist named Oral Roberts. He named it after a Bible passage that inspired his sermons about how God wants to bless people with prosperity, in exchange for donating money to the ministry, of course. Roberts wanted the building to have an ultra-modern, ultra-futuristic feel. He felt that windows were unnecessary, and thanks to technologies like air conditioning and fluorescent lighting, which were relatively new at the time, as a substitute for natural light, he had the walls painted in bright colors. The abundant Life building housed a television studio, an auditorium, a banquet hall, and a mail processing center for the millions of dollars in donations that the ministry received. But Roberts didn't stay there for long. Just a few years after the strange structure was built, he relocated elsewhere. The building went through several owners after that and has been vacant since the late 1980s. It became even uglier in 2019 when workers removed the white marble diamonds that once covered the facade because they kept falling off and were a safety hazard. The property's future is uncertain. There are no redevelopment plans right now, and as unattractive as the building is, some people are fighting to preserve it as a historic structure. Number 5. Leith Harbor Whaling Station. Whaling was a major industry before overhunting took a devastating toll on whale populations throughout the world. When populations in the northern hemisphere began to thin out, a subantarctic island and British overseas territory called South Georgia became the world's largest whaling center. Many countries were involved in the immediately profitable trade, including Britain, which built a whaling station on the island at Port Leith. Also known as Leith Harbor, the station was built in 1909. It was the largest of 7 stations on South Georgia and contained massive whale oil tanks measuring 30 feet tall and 30 feet wide. During their downtime, the employees drank hooch and watched movies at the facility's cinema. There wasn't much else to do at the site, which was thousands of miles away from where most of the workers were from. The station operated until 1965 and has sat abandoned ever since. Today, the property is littered with rusting tractors and other machinery, whale bones, and tools. The whale oil tanks and other structures are losing their battle against the harsh climate as their contents spill out through the holes and broken walls. Mattresses, bed frames, baths, and other fixtures and furnitures are scattered throughout the site. Pinups, bowls, unopened containers of yeast, and other everyday items can still be found inside the dormitories, canteen, and other buildings. It's actually incredibly dangerous to visit the crumbling station, which seems like it could collapse at any minute and is covered in asbestos. Anyone who's interested in exploring the property has to have a good reason for wanting to go there, along with permission from the government. Number 4. Mystery House in the Woods. Mercedes Berger and her family decided to move to Kodak, Tennessee after the town they were living in became too crowded for their liking. They bought a large wooded property and began exploring. It wasn't long before they discovered an abandoned house hidden in the trees. Some of the walls were missing, but the home otherwise appears as if its occupants got up and left one day without taking anything with them. There was even a mug left on the counter, as if someone was interrupted during their morning coffee and never returned. The Bergers sifted through the contents of the house in the hopes of identifying its former owners and learning more about them. It became even more important to find whoever used to live there after Mercedes found a picture of a toddler named Amanda Lynn. Speaking with local station WVLT, she said that if someone in her family had lost a baby picture, they'd want it back. So she wants to put the portrait back into the hands of its rightful owner. She searched for social media users named Amanda Lynn who are around the age she thinks the little girl would be, but found no potential matches. She posted on social media in the hopes that someone would recognize the photo and connect her to the family it belongs to, and the local news covered the story to help get the word out. Amanda and her father were finally identified, but there have been no updates about what caused them to abandon the house, or if they've ever gotten the picture back. Number 3. House of Backbones. An anonymous pair of German explorers who call themselves urbex or geocaching were alarmed to find a room filled with dog spines hanging from the ceiling while exploring an abandoned house recently. The home was completely trashed to begin with and was covered in graffiti, but the dangling backbones took the experience from disgusting to downright disturbing. Fearing the worst, the explorers searched for clues to explain the spines. They found a collection of dog show awards and other items indicating that a large number of Great Danes once lived at the home. There were also several overdue bills laying around, suggesting that the former owner ran into money problems and perhaps fled the property when they could no longer cope with the weight of the issues. But this is just a guess, and nobody knows for sure if financial struggles had anything to do with why so many dogs appear to have died at the home. The pair tried to search for the owner, but they had no luck. Commenters speculated about why the spines were hanging from the ceiling, with one suggesting that the room functioned as a space for hanging meat to age. Why do you think the house had a room full of backbones? Let us know in the comments down below. Number 2. Sagen House. In 1992, an entrepreneur named Nikolai Petrovich Sutyagin began construction on what was supposed to be a 2-story wooden home in the Russian city of Arkhangelsk. But he was inspired by traditional Japanese and Norwegian architecture and continued to build it until he was satisfied with how the house looked. When he was finally done, the structure had grown to be 13 stories tall. Standing at 144 feet, it was believed to be the world's tallest wooden house, even surpassing Russia's tallest church. It took Sutyagin and his family more than 15 years to build the towering structure, which turned out to look nothing like a traditional Japanese or Norwegian home. They didn't get to enjoy the finished product for long before Sutyagin went to prison for several years for some racketeering charges. While he was gone, the home fell into disrepair. It was condemned as a fire hazard in 2008 out of a fear that if it were set ablaze, it would fall over and the flames would spread to nearby homes, which are also made mostly out of wood. The city ordered for the strange structure to be demolished. It was mostly dismantled, leaving behind a 4-story home that burned down in 2012. Number 1. Royal Superfan House. Daniel Sims is an urban explorer from England who documents his adventures on the YouTube channel Bearded Reality. He recently shared footage of an abandoned house in West Yorkshire, England that was filled with newspaper clippings and other documents about the royal family. The articles date as far back as the 1920s and detail the lives of King George V, Prince Charles, and Princess Diana, and other members of the monarchy. There's a publication about the royal family during World War II, along with clippings from Charles and Diana's wedding in 1981, and an article from 1935 about George V's Silver Jubilee. The homeowner didn't only collect coverage of major events in the royals' lives. They followed the family and their relationships over time and kept track of lesser-known figures like Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York, and ex-wife of Prince Andrew. Sims also found hundreds of decades-old National Geographic magazines, along with some rare history books and a helmet collection. He said that the items would probably be worth a lot in the right hands, but that he never takes anything from the sites he explores. So for now, the collection remains inside the house, where it's not being enjoyed or appreciated by anyone.
Number 9. Balaklava Submarine Base. The US and the Soviet Union were allies during World War II, but once the conflict ended, Cold War tensions escalated between the two countries, who engaged in a frenzied arm race in a bid for military superiority. Meanwhile, each superpower prepared for a possible attack from the other by establishing ultra-secure, heavily fortified military bases. The USSR constructed one such facility in the small oceanside town of Balaklava on the Crimean Peninsula, in an area that has functioned as a Russian military port for centuries. Known as Object 825, the base was built underground as a naval installation in 1957, where it was kept hidden from any enemies out on the open seas. Over a 4-year period, builders blasted away rock to create a 2,000-foot-long tunnel, which connects different sections of the interior. Object 825 was designed to withstand and effectively respond to an American nuclear attack. It also served as a repair center for the Soviet Union's Black Sea submarine fleet. There was enough food, water, and other provisions stockpiled at the base to support its 1,500-person staff for a month in the event of a nuclear strike. To ensure maximum security, a large set of doors and a concrete reinforced gate blocked each section of the base. Object 825 closed in 1993, following the fall of the Soviet Union. By the time it became the property of the Ukrainian Navy in 2000, the site had been significantly damaged, with all its metal having been looted for scrap. The base became a museum in 2003. Then, in 2014, Russia seized the Crimean Peninsula. Authorities are reportedly considering restoring it for military use, although it won't be as much of a secret this time around. Number 8. Secret Object Number 6. There's a mysterious semicircular concrete structure along the coast of Peter the Great Bay in Russia's Primorye region. While it's formerly known as the Submarine Shelter Pavlovsko, the Soviets who built it simply called it Secret Object Number 6. Nobody knows exactly when construction began on the top-secret base. It was built into a cliff sometime during the 1960s and functioned as a shelter for submarines to use in the event of a nuclear attack. The structure consists of a network of tunnels spanning 3 levels filled with living and working spaces. In the event of an emergency, submarines would enter through a 1,600-foot-long tunnel with 6-foot-thick concrete walls. But the facility was never finished being built. Construction ground to a halt during the late 1980s as the Soviet Union's money dried up. Operations came to a standstill in 1991, when the USSR and the United States embarked on a series of agreements called the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaties. The negotiation required the Soviet Union to stop building underground maritime structures and to seal off the entrances to some of these bases. The Soviet Union collapsed just 6 months later, and secret object number 6 was abandoned. Many of its tunnels remain sealed off today, and visitors are banned due to the area's abnormally high radiation count. Number 7. Swiss military bunkers. Switzerland is known for taking a hands-off approach to disagreements between other nations. In fact, the country hasn't engaged in any military conflicts in over 150 years, yet it remains paradoxically well fortified. The Swiss government maintained a neutral stance during World War II, but erred on the safe side nevertheless, and built an estimated 20,000 bunkers for keeping its citizens safe. Most of them remain concealed in the landscape to this day. The shelters vary in appearance. Many are hidden in plain sight, disguised as houses, cabins, and other ordinary structures. Others are even less noticeable and are built underground and into hills and mountains. Their entrances are marked only by a door that was designed to blend in with its surroundings. The bunker's existence is no secret, yet most of them remain shrouded in mystery. During the 1990s, the government opened many of them to the public, but the Swiss military disagreed with the decision and refused to cooperate, making it difficult for people to visit the sites. Information about the shelters is even scarce on the internet, and official records are just as obscure. In 2017, photographer Rito Sturci managed to get into some of the bunkers that are now privately owned. Some owners have repurposed them as hotels, restaurants, museums, or personal spaces. Others have left them untouched, serving as a sort of time capsule, complete with their original furniture and equipment. Sturgi captured snapshots featuring decontamination chambers, communal showers, dormitories, and even dining tables that appear to be set for the next meal. Would you ever stay at one of the bunkers they turned into a hotel? Let us know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Aralsk 7. The Aral Sea was once the world's 4th largest inland sea. It began drying up during the 1960s due to a Soviet irrigation project that diverted water away from the rivers that fed it. The sea had all but disappeared by 2010, leaving behind the handful of small lakes that remain today. Before it disappeared, it was home to a 77-square-mile island that straddled the Uzbekistan-Kazakhstan border. Known as Vozrozhdenie, it housed a top-secret Soviet biological weapons testing site called Aralsk 7, which was built in 1948. Scientists tested numerous highly deadly substances here, including anthrax, smallpox, plague, brucellosis, and tularemia. There's no doubt that Aralsk 7 was dangerous. Sadly, the hazards weren't contained to the island, and people didn't need to go there in order to be exposed to the deadly diseases that its staff experimented with. In 1971, workers at the facility accidentally released weaponized smallpox into the air, infecting 10 people and killing 3. Roughly 50,000 residents were vaccinated following the incident, which was largely kept hidden from the public for years to come. The site was closed when the Soviet Union fell in 1991. Around 1,500 residents were evacuated over the following weeks. But the dangers associated with Aralsk 7 didn't stop there. Today, it remains littered with abandoned structures that are filled with containers of biohazardous chemicals that were stored improperly and left behind. Some of the containers have sprung leaks, and it's extremely dangerous, possibly deadly even, for anyone to visit the site. At least 10 anthrax burial sites have been decontaminated as part of an ongoing cleanup effort. But a lot more work needs to be done before Aralsk 7 is anywhere close to being safe. Number 5. Crer Submarine Base. Located off the Japanese coast in Russia's far east, Simushir Island is part of the volcanic Kuril Island archipelago. Nobody lives there now, but it was once home to the Soviet Union's Crer naval base. Built during the Cold War era, the site consisted of the military installation itself and a surrounding town. There were apartment buildings, shops, a school, a hospital, and more. The settlement's population peaked at around 3,000 people. Most of the people who lived there were Navy personnel and their families. A top-secret submarine base operated within the naval base between the late 70s and 1991. With a flooded caldera, the island was the perfect place for storing submarines. Little is known about what went on at the site due to the secrecy surrounding it. Crer is now a ghost town, filled with dilapidated buildings. Faded Soviet artwork adorns the walls. Books are scattered across the floors. Half-finished shoes await repairs, and rusting trucks sit eerily still. In the 30 years since its closure, nature has reclaimed the shell of a town. Overgrowth and animals have taken over the seemingly post-apocalyptic site, which otherwise stands frozen in time. Number 4. Hker Bunker. During the late 1970s and early 80s, the communist East German government built a top-secret nuclear complex deep in the woods outside Berlin. Known as the Hker Bunker, the highly sophisticated facility was designed to protect East German leaders and top military staff in the event of an attack. Situated 79 feet below ground, it's capped with a 13-foot thick layer of cement. The sprawling site consists of 170 rooms, which are connected by a series of tunnels. It was equipped with numerous advanced safety features, including floors that were suspended by cables so that they could withstand powerful aftershocks from an explosion. Upon entering the building, an employee would first visit a decontamination chamber, where they were cleansed of any potential dangerous substances. Construction was kept secret from locals, who remained oblivious to the Hker Bunker's existence for many years. It was engineered to function independently from the outside world, and was capable of housing and feeding 400 staff members for up to 2 weeks. Operations were carried out from the sterile-looking control center, where dozens of knobs, buttons, and switches control the electricity, water system, air filtration system, and air conditioning. The Hker Bunker was impressive, but it was never used for its intended purpose, which is ultimately a good thing, because it means that nobody needed protection from a nuclear attack. The military deemed the facility unusable in 1993, a few years after Germany reunified. One reason they came to this decision is because the bunker's existence was no longer a secret from the public, but the site was also aging and no longer considered modern by then. A group is trying to raise the funds necessary to preserve the site, but its future remains uncertain. Number 3. Olvesund. During the Cold War, the Norwegian government decided that it was a good idea to build a top-secret naval base north of the Arctic Circle. Known as Olvesund, the facility was carved into the mountain outside the city of Tromsø. A 3,000-foot-long tunnel leads to the entrance of the massive clandestine site. The structure consisted of housing, workshops, offices, ammunition depots, and a dry dock with enough room for 6 submarines. There were also several dry docks that were capable of accommodating larger ships. The complex functioned as a Norwegian Royal Navy base from 1967 until 2002, when it lost its official military status. It closed down for good in 2009, following the restructuring of the Norwegian Navy. For a while, Russian entities with connections to a state-owned company rented out the base. Experts soon began to suspect the Russians of carrying out secret military operations at the site. Conveniently, a Norwegian company with a reputation for cooperating with the government became the property's major shareholder in 2019. Coincidence? Probably not. Anyway, the move put an end to whatever the Russians were doing at Olvesund. Military units from Norway's allied countries, including the Dutch Marines, began using the base last year. Number 2. Burlington Bunker. In 1955, the British government built a sprawling 35-acre complex known as the Burlington Bunker in Wiltshire, England. Its existence was kept completely hidden from the public, including local residents, who had no clue that there was a top-secret bunker sitting 100 feet beneath their homes, churches, and cobblestone streets. Built during the Cold War, the facility was designed to enable government employees to continue working in the event of a nuclear attack. It was bomb-proof, radiation-proof, and poison gas-proof. For 30 years, the site was home to England's second-largest phone exchange. Ironically, the system was never used. The Burlington Bunker was equipped to support up to 4,000 central government employees for up to 3 months with no outside contact. It was as self-sustaining as possible, and even had its own water treatment facility, which received its water supply from a nearby lake. The site was equipped with everything its staff would need for both working and living, including kitchens, offices, laundry facilities, supply rooms, cafeterias, a hospital, and more. There was also a TV studio that the government could use for broadcasting public messages if the need arose. The bunker itself was over a mile long. It was surrounded by over 60 miles of roads and even had a secret rail line connecting it to the main railway. But the state-of-the-art facility was never used. By the time it finally closed, it was being run by just 4 Ministry of Defense employees. Its existence was finally declassified in 2004. As it sits frozen in time, the Burlington Bunker's future remains uncertain. Some activists are fighting to save and preserve it, while others think that it should be repurposed for some practical modern-day use. Number 1. Briar Bunker. Next to the Briar Resort in White Sulphur Springs, West Virginia, lies a bunker hidden behind a reinforced steel door, that was successfully kept a secret from the public for 30 years. It was built during the Cold War as a bomb shelter for members of Congress to flee to in the event of a nuclear attack, and was stockpiled with supplies in case disaster struck. A 7,000-foot landing strip enabled these politicians and government officials to fly directly to the site. Nestled in the foothills of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the Briar Resort used to be one of the most famous luxury resorts in the U.S. A plethora of important and wealthy people hung out there, including industrialists and government advisors. The 3,000 residents who live in the surrounding small town began to suspect that something was going on at Briar around the time the bunker was built. They began to demand answers from the property's official historian Bob Conti as soon as he took the position in 1978. He denied their suspicions and even claimed that the landing strip didn't exist. But Conti wasn't necessarily hiding anything. In fact, it's likely that he himself was unaware of the bunker's existence. It's pretty fascinating that the government managed to hide something that was roughly half the size of a typical Walmart. It did so by using part of the building as a conference center and not telling people that it had another, less obvious purpose as a bomb shelter. Conti eventually began to notice things about the property that weren't adding up, including its unusually high number of bathrooms. He also thought it was strange that some alleged employees of a local TV company were always hanging around. They seemed out of place, perhaps because they were actually government workers in disguise, who were tasked with keeping the bunker maintained at all times. Journalist Ted Gupp finally exposed the Briar Bunker in 1992. Consequently, it was taken out of official use. Today, it functions as a data storage facility and a tourist attraction. Congress members still have a place to go in the event of an apocalyptic disaster, but it's located somewhere else, in a place that the government is probably working diligently to keep hidden from the public. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about top-secret abandoned bases, let us know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe. Bye for now.